Cairo, the 10th of May, 1977. On the top floor of the Meridien Hotel on Roda Island, a Palestinian rejectionist commander lifts a glass to himself on his 60th birthday. He has survived 4 assassination attempts in a decade. He has done it by keeping every gathering of the last 10 years off every page. This one is on a page because his only daughter asked him for it. A printed invitation went out from a downtown Cairo stationer 3 weeks ago, and a working guest list has sat on a shelf behind that stationer's counter ever since. Mossad has read the list. Operation Vellum ends before the applause does. This is how they did it. Welcome to Mission Breakdowns. If operations are your subject, subscribe now. A new one lands here every second day. Rashad Anwar al-Tayyib was born in Haifa on the 10th of May, 1917. He was 31 when his family walked out of the city in 1948. And by the time he was 50, he had learned a rule that no other commander in his part of the world had learned as well as he had. The rule was silence. From the middle of 1967 onward, Rashad al-Tayyib did not appear on a guest list, an itinerary, a hotel register, or a program. Not once. Photographs of him circulated inside his own faction and no further. Journalists were told, politely, that he was in Damascus. Diplomats were told, politely, that he was in Beirut. Neither knew. The faction was called the Return Vanguard. In Arabic, Tala al-Auda, a small Iraqi-backed splinter that had formed in the wash of the Palestinian Rejectionist fronts founding in Baghdad in October 1974. About 180 armed men, a single-walled residence in Zamalek by 1976, a shell company for its money in Beirut. In a decade of Palestinian factional life, it did not print a magazine, hold a rally, or announce a congress. Its commander held that anything a printer could reproduce could kill him. On this one point, he was correct. 4 attempts had reached his door in the 10 years since he had gone silent. 2 were bombs, one under a car in East Beirut in the summer of 1969, one in the stairwell of a Damascus apartment in the spring of 1972. Neither found him, because on both mornings he was where no announcement said he would be. The third was a marksman on a rooftop, opposite a coffee house in Zamalek, in the autumn of 1973. The target had canceled the coffee an hour earlier because a phone call had shifted his afternoon. The fourth was a poisoning through a household cook in the winter of 1975. The cook was caught because his instructions arrived on a piece of paper the household detail found on him. Paper again. Always paper. At the file, it had been given at the Mossad Research Division in Tel Aviv. The target's doctrine was called the Ghost. It had a code inside the archive and a corner of a shelf, and by early 1974, one person keeping it warm. She was in her second year at the division, and she was not senior. She did not have a photograph on her wall of the man she was hunting, because no reliable photograph of him existed in the file. What she had was a set of habits, a decade of gatherings that did not happen on any page, and one operational suspicion she could not shake. Silence, held long enough by anyone, opens exactly one door. The door to the person no silence is ever really kept from. The doctrine was proof against foreign services and proof against journalists, and proof against surveillance photographers on rooftops. It was not proof against a daughter. The analyst opened the file at Mossad's research division on the 22nd of January 1974. Her name was Hila Sokoli. The code name on the folder was Fantail. She was 29, a Damascus-born Israeli whose Arabic was better than her Hebrew, and her office at Guerrilla faced a corridor rather than a window. The file itself was thin. 3 unreliable photographs, 4 assessments contradicting one another, and a set of habits describing what the target did not do. There was no address, no telephone number, no known car, no known day of the week when he could be counted on to be anywhere. It was the smallest live file in the division. For 8 months she worked around the target's silence rather than through it. She built a map of his household by mapping what his household did not do. It went to no receptions. It sent no children to school in the countries it lived in. It paid no household staff by check. In the autumn of 1974, it stopped paying rent on the Beirut-walled residence for a period of 9 weeks, then resumed. Somewhere in those 9 weeks, the analyst noted in the margin, the household had moved and moved back. a rehearsal for an emergency or an actual one. In late 1975, she caught the corner of a document she had not been looking for. It was not a Mossad document. It was a photocopy of an enrollment card at Cairo University, dated the 15th of October, 1975, in the name of a young woman with a Jordanian passport and a family address in Amman that the analyst recognized as a laundered address. That address had appeared once, 4 years earlier, in an intercepted payment slip signed by the target's wife. She pulled the address out of the file and matched it to the enrollment card and to a Cairo lease at Sharia, Brazil, in Zamalek. The lease had been signed in the same month as the enrollment. It was in the name of the same young woman. Muna al-Tayyib was 22 years old in the autumn of 1975, and she was reading English literature. She was the target's only daughter. She had been born in a hospital in Damascus, and she had been kept until she asked her father for university in a walled house in Beirut. Now she was in Cairo, in a walled house in Zamalek, going to a lecture hall on the Nile every morning. The analyst read the card 3 times to make sure of what it told her. It told her that the target had done, for the sake of his daughter, the one thing he had done for no one else in a decade. He had let the household appear on a page. For 18 months after that, Fantail widened the file around the daughter. She traced her taxi rank. She traced her stationer. She traced the grocer's boy who came to the villa's rear service gate on Wednesdays. She traced the tuning of a piano the villa did not have 3 years before the enrollment card and had within a year of it. By the middle of 1976, the file was no longer thin. It had the geometry of a room a father had arranged for his daughter and had not yet noticed he was standing inside. The birthday was a date the target could not move. He had been born on the 10th of May, 1917. In the second week of March, 1977, the household began to argue about it. 60 was not an anniversary that could be observed inside the villa. The daughter had made this clear in a letter that a household courier carried to a Cairo pharmacy where the target's wife collected a prescription every second Wednesday. The letter was in the daughter's own hand. It said, in essence, that a father who had refused every photograph for a decade could refuse his daughter a room in which he sat down for one evening. It said that Beirut was not safe. Damascus was a war on the doorstep. Cairo, at the 10th of May, would be the one place in the Arab world where a Palestinian family sat down without an armed man standing behind the chair. The head of the target's protection detail was Mahmoud Fahim Zaidan, a former Palestine Liberation Army captain who had been with the household for 12 years. He wrote back to the target in his own hand and used the word no 3 times in a paragraph of 41 words. His written objection is not in the Mossad file. No such letter left the household. But the outcome of the argument is, the target overruled him. He would sit down for the evening. His daughter would be at the head of the table opposite him. The household would announce nothing to the wider faction. There would be no press. There would be 112 guests, drawn from a list the target himself would sign off online by line. Mahmoud Fahim Zaidan wrote out a set of conditions the following morning. The venue would be an international flag hotel with foreign passport holders on the door, not a private restaurant. The banquet would be on a floor without direct street access. There would be 4 bridges to the venue, and a man of his on each of them. The kitchen would be watched from 3 positions during service. Every bottle at the top table would be opened by the target's own steward in front of the target. On these he did not compromise. What he did not know, because the target did not tell him, was that the daughter had already chosen the hotel, Le Meridien, Roda Island. She had a friend on the events team. The friend on the events team was not a friend. Le Meridien had opened on the northern tip of Roda Island in 1974. It was 3 years old on the operational night. The tower rose 28 stories above a bend where the Nile split into a wider western channel toward Giza and a narrower eastern channel toward Old Cairo. Its facade was ribbon windows and precast panels. Its top floor was a single banquet room with the Nile on 3 sides and the city of Cairo on the 4th. To a man who had spent a decade behind a wall, it looked like a wall of a different kind. The island itself was reachable by 4 permanent crossings. The Khedive Abbas Bridge from Giza in the southwest, the Kobri al-Malek al-Saleh from Old Cairo in the southeast, the Kobri Muhammad Ali on the university side in the northwest, the pedestrian Kobri al-Monasterli at the southern tip, above the medieval Nilometer, 4 checkpoints, 4 watchers, 4 ways out. Mahmoud Fahim. Zaidan drew the 4 bridges on a piece of paper the day the venue was confirmed and marked, at each one, the initials of a man he trusted. He believed the geography was the security. The target agreed. Both men were exactly wrong about the direction the geography ran. The daughter's argument for Roda had been that the island was quiet, that the tower was tall enough for the Nile wind, that the French flag over the door meant no Egyptian officer was in the building unless invited. All of these were true. What she did not say because she did not know was that the events team of the hotel had, since the previous October, contained a bilingual French-Arabic-English coordinator on a Cypriot passport who had already learned every service door on the banquet floor. Her name at the hotel was Yasmin Choueri. Her name at Nicosia Station was Adi Newman. Her code name at Glilo was Rail. To understand why Roda Island was, in fact, the exposure and not the sanctuary the target believed, it is worth pausing on one detail Mahmoud Fahim Zaidan did not put on his sketch. The banquet floor of a French flag international hotel in Cairo in the spring of 1977 was managed by its own staff, in its own languages, under its own regulations, and the local government security services were not, by contract, welcome inside the service corridors. This left the target's protection detail one option and one option only: to place its own people among the guests and its own people at the 4 bridges, and to rely on the hotel's staff to be, as hotel staff are on any given Tuesday, staff. The 4 bridges kept everyone else off the island. The 4 bridges did not keep the operation off the island. The operation was already at the top of the tower, in a beige uniform, with a clipboard in her right hand. Adi Newman had been on the Meridien Cairo staff since the 21st of October, 1976. She had arrived with a Cypriot passport in the name of Yasmin Choueri, a diploma from a Beirut hotel management school that existed and that had produced her file, and a set of references from 2 Cyprus hotels that did exist, and that would confirm her employment when Cairo inquired. She was 31. She spoke French, Arabic, and English, in that order of first-hand fluency. She had been trained for the placement at a house outside Nicosia across 6 months in 1976, and she had crossed into Egypt on a scheduled Cyprus Airways flight from Larnaca on the 20th. She had never been to Cairo before. She had, at the point of arrival, 32 Egyptian pounds in cash, a leather suitcase, and a personal history she had been living inside for 4 years. The first 3 months were a hotel job. She worked the small events on the mezzanine floor. She sat at the events desk in the lobby in a beige uniform with a name badge that read Y. Choueri, and she processed weddings and product launches and the diplomatic receptions of the smaller Arab embassies. In February 1977, she was assigned to the banquet floor at the top of the tower. That was the assignment that had been waited for since the summer of 1976. The banquet floor role gave her the room. It gave her the service corridors, the elevator keys, the kitchen access door, the wine cellar, the linen store, the sequence in which staff rotated through the shift on a normal Tuesday night. It gave her, above all, a legitimate reason to be in every corner of the top floor of a 28-story tower, and to have a clipboard in her hand while she was there. A placement legend has a purpose that outsiders often mistake. It exists so that the operation happens while the job is being done, in the same hands, in the same hour, indistinguishable from work. She had a handler in Nicosia. Netanel Ben-Or ran her from the station, codename Koot. Their contact was 1 telephone call a week from a public phone in downtown Cairo, always at the same time on a Thursday. Always in 3 prearranged phrases, always inside 40 seconds. Nothing operational was said. What was said was that she was well, that she was where she was expected to be, and that a small phrase, a shade of green in a color scheme, a change of a supplier, meant one of 3 things. The 3 things were continue, pause, extract. There is a moment in every long placement, and every operative who has done one knows it, when the woman you have been for 4 years begins to weigh more than the woman who was sent. In February, in the 2nd week of the banquet floor assignment, Adi Newman spent a Sunday afternoon on the roof terrace of a friend's apartment in Zamalek. A friend of Yasmin Choueri, a real French national from Lyon who worked for the Cairo office of a shipping line, and she caught herself laughing in a way that was Yasmin's laugh, not hers. She noted it that night in her private diary, which she kept in a code her handler had taught her, and she added one line beneath it in Hebrew. The line said, "The placement is a person now. Keep the placement. Do the job." She read the line back the following morning, closed the diary, and put it in the drawer of her bedside table. She did not open the diary again for 4 weeks. The job arrived on the 14th of March in a booking that came across her desk from the Zamalek villa of a client billed as Al-Sadaqah Import-Export. 60 guests originally, then 80, then 112, a private birthday, a gentleman's 60th. The events manager took the booking with a smile the client's assistant remembered as professional and unmemorable. Then she went to the wine cellar and stood for 1 minute with her hand on a rack she would not touch for another 8 weeks. The operation was announced by the target's own household, in the hotel's own black ledger booking book. The list was not yet on it. The list came 4 days later. The stationer was on Sharia Adli near the Anglo-Egyptian bookshop, in a building that had been a stationer's since the 1930s. The name over the door read, in French and Arabic, Papeterie Chaudry, Imprimeur. The proprietor was in his 60s, and he had printed in his career the wedding cards of ambassadors, the funeral cards of ministers, and the private invitations of several men who had been quietly killed within a month of the reception. He was not a political man. He was a good printer. He kept a working guest list, against which every printed invitation was reconciled before it was addressed. The working list sat, when the shop was open, in a lever arch file on a shelf behind the counter, at approximately shoulder height for a man of average build. On his shelf, at any given time, there were between 4 and 9 such lists. Farid Ashkar was the Beirut catering-supply sayan. He had been running in and out of Cairo on tourist visas since 1971. He was Lebanese, Maronite, 48, a hospitality supply agent for a Nicosia-registered trading company that did exist and that did trade, and he came to Cairo 3 or 4 times a year on ordinary supply business. Table linens for the international hotels, custom crockery for embassies, glassware for banquets. He had, over 6 years, built a working relationship with 3 downtown Cairo stationers. Papeterie Chaudry was one of them. He supplied, on a small margin, the coded cardstock the printer used for his premium invitations. It was a real trade. It was not a cover for anything. He had made deliveries to that shop, personally, on 11 occasions between 1972 and 1976. On the 9th of April, 1977, Farid Ashkar walked into Papeterie Chaudry at 4:40 in the afternoon with a case of cardstock samples and a genuine order to place. The proprietor's assistant had gone home 10 minutes earlier. The proprietor himself was at the back, working the platen press. The shop was empty. The lever arch files were on the shelf. The Beirut Sayan photographed 4 lists in 7 minutes with a Minox that lived in the lining of his jacket. He replaced each file in the position it had been in, matched to a pencil mark he had made on the shelf a fortnight earlier. He placed his order. He left the shop at 5:02. He was on an Alitalia flight to Rome at 9:30 that night with a manifest of a hospitality trade delegation, and the film changed hands at Rome Fiumicino at 2 the following morning. It reached Larnaca by a mid-morning commercial flight and was driven inland to the Nicosia station office by 12. The list, Netanel Ben Or, laid out on his desk in Nicosia at 11:40 on the 10th of April, had 112 names on it. Only 14 of the names were faction. The other 98 were the daughters, university friends, 2 lecturers, a Cairo neighbor, a Beirut cousin, and the wider social edge of a young woman's life a father had let her have. It was a real birthday. That was what made the list operational. A birthday's guest list is a family document. It is not something a father lies inside. It is not something a security chief edits. It goes to a printer, is reconciled, is addressed, and is sent. For a decade, Mahmoud Fahim Zaidan had held one operational principle above every other. Whatever the household writes down, the household writes as a lie. Cars ordered under other names, prescriptions collected on other people's cards, hotels booked and abandoned, restaurants confirmed and canceled. Every document that left the walled residence was a decoy or a rehearsal for a decoy. He believed correctly that the household's paper defended it. He did not consider, because no security chief in his position could easily have considered, that the household's paper would one day be paper the household had every reason to keep truthful. The birthday broke the rule from the inside. The list on the shelf was the exact list the target's household believed only it had seen. It was now the list Nicosia had seen. The door was open. The birthday had a ritual. Every year since the target had gone into silence, on the 10th of May, wherever he had been, a single bottle of a specific vintage had been placed at the head of whatever table he sat at. The vintage was not chosen because it was famous. It was chosen because it was scarce, because it required a Beirut merchant to source it, and because, for a decade, the sourcing of that bottle had been the one legitimate errand a member of the target's household ran outside the walled residence on a fixed schedule. In an operational sense, the vintage was itself a signal. It was the tell that the birthday was being observed at all. On the 24th of April, 1977, the Beirut merchant received a written order from the target's household for one bottle, air freight, receiving address a Cairo hotel. The order was signed by the household steward and countersigned by the target's wife. The bottle was to arrive at Meridien, Cairo on the 6th of May, no earlier, no later. The merchant had filled the order every May for 11 years and would have filled it in his sleep. He filled it that day. The route was standard for the merchant's international clientele. The bottle was boxed at his cellar in Acrefieh on the 25th. It was couriered to Beirut International Airport on the 26th. It flew on a Middle East Airlines flight to Larnaca, cleared Cypriot customs as a personal consumption import, and was transshipped through the airport's freight desk onto a Cyprus Airways flight to Cairo. It was in the freight hall at Cairo International on the 28th. It cleared Egyptian customs the following morning on a laundered import license held by Farid Ashkar's Nicosia Trading Company. It arrived at Le Meridien's back of house on the 2nd of May, 4 days ahead of schedule. For the 4 days it sat in the hotel's wine cellar in a locked cage in the section of the cellar reserved for personal consumption bottles held for private events. The cage was accessible only to the head sommelier of the hotel and to the banquet floor events manager. On the evening of the 2nd of May, the events manager conducted her routine end-of-day cellar check. The Sadaka import-export booking was on her clipboard. The bottle was on her shelf. She turned it in the rack and read the label. She did not touch it that night. The substitution took place at 18:20 on the 10th of May, during standard cellar handling in the hour when the head sommelier was on the banquet floor supervising the setting of the top table. The vector was a rapid-onset cardiotoxin. The delivery was a substitution of a small quantity of the bottle's contents through the existing capsule during the resting phase before service. The dossier this operation was built on states the mechanism at documentary level only. The item the target's own ritual guaranteed he would consume was the item that carried the agent. No formulation is on this page. No dose is on this page. This is a mystery, not a manual. At 1852, the head sommelier returned from the banquet floor, decanted the bottle in front of no one, and tasted a small measure himself. He tasted from a small measure poured before the substitution, had introduced the agent into the pouring column of the bottle. He pronounced the vintage and condition. He returned to the banquet floor at 1859 with the decanter under his arm and placed it on a service trolley at the top table's dressing station. The trolley wheeled through the double doors at 1928. The room was full by then. The 10th of May in Cairo begins at 4 in the morning with a call to prayer that carries a mile in the dry air. The temperature at dawn is 19 degrees. By noon, it is 32. The Nile at Roda smells of silt. On the operational day, a Khamsin haze that had cleared the previous afternoon returned briefly around 11 and then blew out by 2. The sky over the tower cleared. The wind dropped. The city was open. The target arrived at the hotel at 1840. He came in a gray Peugeot 504 with government plates borrowed for the evening from a friend, one car ahead of the household's own driver in a second gray Peugeot 504. Mahmoud Fahim Zaidan sat in the front seat of the target's car and did not turn his head as the vehicle crossed the Kobri al-Malik al-Saleh onto the island. His man on the bridge, in a cotton shirt and no jacket, was reading a newspaper on the parapet. His man at the second bridge was standing by a taxi rank. His man at the third bridge was walking a route past a coffee kiosk. His man at the fourth bridge was in a shop front doorway across from the pedestrian crossing, All 4 of his people were in position. All 4 were on the bridges. None was in the tower. Inside the tower, at the top floor, the events manager stood at the service door of the banquet room and ran a final check with the head sommelier and the head kitchen porter. The linen at the top table had been laid at 1730. The place cards had been set at 1750. The service trolley from the wine cellar had wheeled in at 1928 and had come to rest at the dressing station 6 paces behind the top table's dais. She noted each of these times against her clipboard. She had noted for the last 3 months the timing of every top table setting the banquet floor had held, and she knew the tolerance of every step in the sequence to within half a minute. This one was within tolerance. The guests arrived from 1930. The daughter came in a green silk dress her mother had sent from Damascus in a box. She stood at her father's side at the top of the banquet floor lobby, and she greeted every guest by name. There were 98 names in Cairo she knew by heart. The 14 faction names she did not know, and she greeted them by title. 2 return vanguard lieutenants had flown in from Baghdad on the afternoon flight, 3 from Tripoli, 2 from a house near Latakia, 7 Cairo resident sympathizers. The events manager stood at the double doors of the banquet room and directed the flow with a clipboard in her right hand and a smile she had rehearsed 1,000 times. At 21:17, the head sommelier lifted the decanter from the service trolley. At 21:18 exactly, the target rose from his seat at the head of the top table. His daughter rose beside him. He raised the glass. He spoke in Arabic, a private line addressed to his daughter, a sentence from his own wedding, 28 years earlier, that no one at the table who was not family would have understood the weight of. He drank. At 21:22, he sat down and paused. At 21:24, he loosened his collar and asked, in a voice the guest to his right described later as ordinary, for a glass of water. At 21:26, his color changed. At 21:27, the daughter, who was watching his hands, saw the glass of water shake. At 21:29, in front of 111 other people, the commander of the return vanguard lost consciousness at the head of the top table on Roda Island at his own 60th birthday. The house doctor at the hotel reached the top of the tower in 3 minutes on the service lift. The events manager cleared the room in 7, with the professional calm of a woman for whom this was a rehearsed procedure of another kind. The target's private cardiologist, who had flown in from Beirut that afternoon and had been seated at the top table 2 seats from the head, was already at his patient's side. A hotel car took the target down to the lobby on the service lift at 21:34. A private ambulance was called at 21:37 from the front desk switchboard. It arrived in 11 minutes. It reached a nearby hospital at 21:59. The commander of the return vanguard was declared dead in the ambulance at the door. Adi Newman left the top of the tower at 21:52. She took her handbag, her uniform jacket, and her hotel employee file identity card. She left, in her small locker on the mezzanine floor, everything else she owned in the name of Yasmin Choueri. She rode the service lift to the ground floor and walked out through the staff exit on the west side of the tower at 21:58. A black and white taxi took her over the Kobri Muhammad Ali at 22:05. She was in Cairo International Airport's departures hall at 22:47. Her Cyprus Airways ticket for the 6 a.m. flight to Larnaca was already in her passport. She waited in the lounge, drank a cup of coffee she did not taste, and did not speak to anyone. She boarded at 5:30. The aircraft lifted at 6:09. She was in Larnaca by 7:04. Roy Adiv left the hotel earlier, and by another route. He had checked out of his suite on the 11th floor at 18:30, ostensibly on his way to a meeting in Beirut. He had left at reception a forwarding address in Brussels that would receive no mail. His Alitalia flight to Rome went at 9:50. He was in Rome at 1:15 the following morning, and in a safe apartment in the city center by 2:30. Amir Zamir did not go through the airport. He drove out of Cairo on the desert road toward Alexandria in a Peugeot 504 with Cairo plates at midnight, and was in the port of Alexandria at 4:40. He crossed to Larnaca on a Cyprus-registered coaster the following night as a supernumerary crew member. The car was resold through a used vehicle dealer in a Delta town to a family who owned it for the next 11 years and never learned whose it had been. The mission commander, Netanel Ben-Or, learned that the target was dead at 2214 local through a shipping company telex from Larnaca to Nicosia that contained no operational language and one date. The date was the 10th of May. He walked out of the station office into the street, sat down on a low wall in the shade of a plane tree, and did not speak to another person for 2 hours. The professional life of a mission commander at the end of a successful operation is not what films show. Silence sits on him instead, for as long as it takes, and the operation, finished, weighs on the shoulders of the one man who authorized it. He got up. He went back to the office. He wrote his cable. The Cairo morning papers on the 11th of May carried in Al-Ahram on the 4th page and in the Egyptian Gazette on the 3rd a 2-paragraph notice of the death of a Beirut businessman, age 60, at a private reception at the Meridien Hotel the previous evening. The cause was given as cardiac arrest. No name of the return vanguard appeared in either report. No name of the target appeared in either report. The businessman was listed under one of the target's 3 commercial covers. The notice observed that a private funeral would take place in Beirut. The notice was accurate on every point except the one that mattered. It had not, in the medical sense, been arrest. It had been engineered. The return vanguard named a successor on the 17th of May. He was one of the 2 lieutenants who had flown in from Baghdad on the afternoon of the 10th. He held the leadership of the faction for 9 years before an internal split in 1986 reduced it to a Damascus office and a bank account. 3 other rejectionist households in 3 capitals canceled every announced anniversary they had scheduled through 1978 within a fortnight of the Cairo notice. That change of behavior across the rejectionist current, and not the death of one commander, was the operational payoff Nicosia had authorized the operation on. The interior story is harder. The daughter, Muna al-Taib, learned that her father was who he was on the 21st of May from the front page of the Beirut newspaper An-Nahar, in a photograph she did not recognize until she read the caption. She had not known. She had not been told. She left Cairo University at the end of the semester and did not return. Here is the moral question the case leaves in a room. On the one side stands a man who had spent a decade making himself unreachable and who died at the hand of an operation that reached him through the one person he had lowered his silence for. On the other stands a mission commander in Nicosia whose file made the case that this man's continued freedom would have cost lives in the summer of 1978. Lives whose names, because the operation succeeded, no one now knows. Both statements are true at the same time. The chief was a father. The chief was a man his own colleagues in Nicosia believed had signed the deaths of others. The daughter did not deserve to lose her father to a birthday she had asked for. The people in the summer of 1978 did not deserve to die. If a decade of invisibility can be broken only by the people who love you, is a birthday still a door? Say what you think below. The 2 positions do not resolve, and this comment section is where they get argued. Subscribe if you want the next operation in this series, which lands here the day after tomorrow. Share this with the friend who watches you watch these. That is the whole of it for tonight.